grab your heartbeat, share us round. Now tap that screen, tap it, tap it, tap that screen, yeah, tap it, tap it. It's your
Keaton has entered the grotto.
Gang gremlins on the scene. Gang gremlins on the scene.
Grumps has entered the grotto.
Gang gremlins on the scene.
We would be honored if you would join. We would be honored.
Gaga and Grumps has entered the grotto.
Tap it, tap it, tap that screen, yeah, tap it, tap it. Gang gremlins come and let's go. Now tap that screen.
PH has entered the grotto.
Yeah, tap it, tap it. Let's see those team stickers flow. Gang gremlins on the scene. Now tap that screen. Now tap that screen.
Grumps has entered the grotto.
Grumps says at PH7 high.
Now tap that screen.
Gaga Grumps says hey PH7.
PH has entered the grotto.
Gang gremlins on the scene.
PH7 says hello.
Welcome.
Keaton says hey hey Grumps.
Keaton has entered the grotto.
Gremlins to the game grotto. Welcoming guys, settle down. Grab your heartbeat.
Gaga and Grumps has entered the grotto.
Tap that screen, tap it, tap it, tap that screen, yeah, tap it, tap it. It's your warm-up routine. Gang gremlins on the scene. Gang gremlins on the scene. Gang gremlins on the scene. Gang gremlins on the scene.
Gaga Grumps says well hopefully TTS will kick in now.
Now tap that screen. Tap it, tap it, tap that screen, yeah, tap it, tap it. Gang gremlins come.
Gaga Grumps says welcome gremlins to the game grotto. Take a seat, grab your daily heart, claim your points and prepare to
Let's
play.
see those team stickers flow. Gang gremlins on the scene. Now tap that screen. Now tap that screen.
Gaga Grumps says treasure box up if you need a coin for your daily heart.
Now tap that screen. Gang gremlins on the scene.
Gaga Grumps says who is ready to play Wordle.
Grumps says at Rugamer 13 high.
Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Grumps says at Busbutter Malmo welcome back.
Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A, B. Gaga Grumps says thanks for doing your daily heart PH7.
Busbutter Malmo has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Race to the top like a thorn. Tap and don't stop like a thorn. Who will be crowned like a thorn? Gremlin renowned like a thorn. Fingers on fire like a thorn. Gremlins don't tire like a thorn. Hearts beat flying like a thorn. Gremlins defying
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance. Gaga Grumps says your word starting with B, please, bus spotter. Gaga Grumps says beast you got. Gaga Grumps says hey, I love Cali.
PH7 says tacky.
Gaga Grumps says yellow A&T in need of homes. Gaga Grumps says tacky fits.
Has entered the grotto.
PH7 says triad.
Gaga Grumps says triad works.
Martin Clark has entered the grotto.
Martin Clark 491 says trial.
TH7 says topaz.
Gaga Grumps says alives at number 4. Gaga Grumps says hey Martin. Gaga Grumps says topaz works. No plurals, love Cali.
It's playtime! Gaga is in the box! Don't let her lose! Grumps is
Gaga
on
Grumps says
buttons.
GG Gremlins. Let's see those
Go
W's
let
in
it
the chat.
push yours! Are you ready to play? Let those stickers fly! Which team are you on? Team Gaga, give a cheer. Team Grumps, are you here? Team Gaga, are you ready? Team Grumps, are you steady? Game!
Gaga Grumps says doo-doo to Gaga. Share the LIVE, chat the chat and shower her with roses and GGs.
Team Gaga, 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 Team Gaga, give a cheer. Team Grumps, are you here? Team Gaga, are you ready? Team Grumps, are you steady? Game! Gremlins, let's go! Game! Gremlins, let's go! Game! Gremlins, let's go!
Gaga Grumps says grab your daily heart while I set up the next ball. Gaga Grumps says let's play Wordle. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat
Haji
now.
Naveed has entered the grotto.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Catalina Wing
Grumps
has
says
entered
at
the
Haji
grotto.
Naveed Heya. Grumps says at Catalina Wing hello.
Catalina 999 says at Grumps HII. Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. M. Gaga Grumps says hi Catalina, thanks for doing your daily heart. Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Like a thong, race to the top, like a thon, tap and don't stop, like a thon, who will be crowned like a thon, gremlin renowned like a thon, fingers on fire like a thon, gremlins don't tire like a thon, hearts beat
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance.
Grace Marshall has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says your word starting with M please Grumps.
AKE Tar has entered
Grumps
the
says
grotto.
mouse.
Eta iota 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 theta rho says maple.
Gaga Grumps says mouse you got. Gaga Grumps says hi Nikki. AKE Tar says hello.
Grumps says meh.
Gaga Grumps says a yellow O in need of a new home.
PH7 says banjo.
Grumps says aorta. Grumps says forget that.
Gaga Grumps says oh can't go there. Gaga Grumps says banjo fits. Gaga grumps says no change.
Here has entered the grotto.
Gia says prowl.
Gaga grumps says hi Gia, prowl fits.
TH7 says troop.
Gia says droop.
Gaga grumps says R and O live at number 2 and 3, P needs a home. Gaga grumps says troop works.
Catalina999 says droop.
Gaga grumps says is droop the only option.
PH7 says yes.
Gaga grumps says yeah I don't see anything else spelt that way. Gaga grumps says GG gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat.
Good game.
A random star chosen by fate. Play a part, it's a live date.
Good game.
A Wordle with Gaga. A Wordle with Gaga.
Gaga grumps says thanks for FL lowering the cat. Gaga grumps says and thanks for the GG.
Get it in 3, it's do or die. Only in 3.
Gaga grumps says can you beat me at Wordle? Check out my daily posts and share your results with me.
And then Iota Beta Rose says heart.
GSS stars.
Gaga grumps says grab me while I set
PLSSOM.pxz
the next
has entered the grotto.
Som VX Z says hello. BLO Som VX Z says any treasure boxes.
Claralis has entered the grotto.
Grumps says at
We would be honored
BL0lesson.pxz hey.
if you would join us.
Claralis says hey everyone heart hands heart hands heart hands.
BLO Som VXZ says at Claire Ellis hey.
Iota Theta Rose says tribe.
Grumps says at Claralis welcome back.
Below Som VXE says letter guesses.
Below Some VXE says F maybe.
Gaga grumps says treasure box up if you need a coin for your daily heart. Gaga Grumps says thanks for doing your daily heart, Claire.
Grumps says nah, Q.
Gaga Grumps says thanks for doing your daily heart, Haji. Gaga Grumps says now let's play Wordle. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Biello Sam VXD says, let's go, I am so smart.
Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. F.
Grumps says at BL0SM.VXZ Witchcraft.
Gaga Grumps says Woot Blossom. Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
BLO Song BXE says at Grumps maybe.
Cupcake has entered the grotto.
Grumps says at Cupcake High.
Cupcake says, good evening, everyone.
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance. Gaga Grumps says hey Cupcake.
We would be honored if you would join us. We would be honored if you would join us.
Gaga Grumps says your word starting with F, please Blossom.
Blue Zombie XD says fire.
Gaga Grumps says thanks for doing your daily heart, Cupcake. Gaga Grumps says
Any
flying
aka
god.
Nails Girl has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says thanks for doing your daily heart, Blossom.
BLO Song VXD says at Gaga and Grumps are welcome.
BL0SOMVXZ says whoa.
MuTG has entered the
Gaga
grotto.
Grumps says Wheel chose the right letter and Blossom nearly got a Wordle in one.
MEWTG says flyer.
Blow Song BXE says Flea.
BLO Some VXE says flyer or fleer.
Gaga Grumps says fireworks for that.
Claire Alice says flyer.
Any aka Nails Girl says hi.
Blossom VXC says filler word or.
Gaga Grumps says flyer fits cause I don't think fleer is a word.
Blossom VXC says it is.
Below some VXC says fleer is a word.
BLO Sam VXZ says congrats.
Gaga Grumps says what is fleer?
Fireworks for Gaga. It's a performance explode 'em on her face. She's in a happy place.
Gaga Grumps says fireworks for Blossom.
Wordle within 3, so gifts explode with glee. Fireworks for Gaga. Emojis make her happy. As in her face.
Shireen Curly has entered the grotto.
Fireworks for Gaga. Thanks for the follow. Fireworks for Gaga.
Good game.
Anything will be okay. If you can, that's okay. Smiley's in chat to win the day.
Good game.
Fireworks for Gaga.
Good game. Good game.
Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga.
Gaga Grumps says GG chat. Gaga Grumps says I learned something new.
Blossom VXZ says, what would you do if someone sent you a TikTok universe? It's the best gift.
Gaga Grumps says probably have a heart attack.
BLO Sam VXZ says at Gaga and Grumps 0.
Gaga Grumps says grab you daily heart while I set up the next board. Gaga Grumps says I think a 500 coin gift is about the biggest I've got lol.
Blossom VXC says lol.
Gaga Grumps says let's play Wordle.
Blossom VXZ says letter guess is E.
BLO Sam VXD says OJ.
Shireen Curly says juicy. Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. J. Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Shenanigans has entered the grotto.
Says hyper.
Like a thumb, race to the top, like a thon. Tap and don't stop, like a thon. Who will be crowned?
Gaga Grumps says thanks for the rose Haji.
Gremlin renowned, like a thon. Fingers on fire, like a thon. Gremlins don't tire, like a thon. Hearts beat flying, like a thon. Gremlins defying,
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance.
Shinagan says join Dexy.
Gaga Grumps says your word starting with J, please Shireen, and hi, didn't see you come in.
Shianagen says jumps.
Blossom VXD says J is kinda a hard one. Look, all I can think of is joint.
Gaga Grumps says hi, Cheyenne.
Shireen Curly says hi, and Juicy.
Gaga Grumps says juicy you got. BL0SSOMBXZ says, Kingrat. Gaga Grumps says Cheyenne is my daughter's name but spelt correctly.
Shianijin says Manixk.
Shireen Curly says chair.
Gaga Grumps says Yellow INC in need of new homes.
Blossom VXZ says chain.
Gaga Grumps says Manic Fits.
Shireen Curly says Sonic.
Shanigans says Ionic or Sonic.
Blossom VXZ says Conic.
Debbie Van Pra has entered the grotto.
Debbie Van Pra says tunic.
Blossom VXZ says filler worse.
Blusam VXD says filler word.
Gaga Grumps says yeah, I think it might be an Onic trap, let's run Sonic to check then filter.
Below Som VXZ says Conic.
Charlie E has entered the grotto.
Charlie says tonic.
Shianagen says ionic conic or tonic.
Shianigans says run Ionic and then catch.
Blossom VXZ says twice.
Gaga Grumps says I'm going to run sighted. Chinaman says I is going to be yellow. Gaga grumps says tonic it is.
BL0SSOMVXZ says tonic.
Shinagan says tonic.
Charlie says yep, it's tonic. Welcome, Gremlins, to the Game Grotto. Welcome, Gremlins, to the Game Grotto.
Welcome in, guys. Settle down.
Gaga grumps says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat.
Now tap that screen, tap it, tap it, tap that screen, yeah, tap it, tap it. It's your warm-up routine. Game Gremlins on the scene. Game Gremlins on the scene. Game Gremlins on the scene.
Gaga grumps says doodadoo for Gaga. Share the LIVE, chat the chat and chow her with roses and GGs.
Now tap that screen, tap it, tap that screen, yeah, tap it, tap it. Game Gremlins, come and let's go. Now tap that screen, tap it, tap that screen, yeah, tap it. Let's see those team stickers flow. Game Gremlins on the scene. Now tap that screen.
Gaga grumps says grab your daily heart while I set up the next
Now
call.
tap that screen. Now tap that screen. Gang Gremlins on the scene.
Gaga grumps says treasure box up if you need a coin for your daily heart. Gaga grumps says who is ready to play Wordle. Gaga grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now. Gaga grumps says we are starting with A. M.
Shireen Curly says I guessed it right, haha.
Gaga grumps says great prediction, Shireen. Gaga grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Like a thong, race to the top. Like a thon, tap and don't stop. Like a thon, who will be crowned? Like a thon.
Gaga grumps says can you crash the second like Goldest race?
Fingers on fire. Like a thon, gremlins don't tire. Like a thon, hearts beat flying. Like a thon, gremlins defying.
Gaga grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance. Gaga grumps says like goal smashed your fingers rock. Gaga grumps says your word starting with M please Shireen.
Shireen Curly says money.
Gaga grumps says money you got.
PH7 says plain.
Gaga grumps says a yellow N in need of a home.
Shireen Curly says blonde.
Gaga grumps says plain fits.
PH7 says gland.
Gaga grumps says L and are moved into number 2 and 3N still homeless.
Shireen Curly says bland.
Gaga grumps says gland works. Gaga grumps says N lives at number 4 Wordle Strare.
Keaton says clank.
Shireen Curly says blank.
Gaga grumps says clank fits.
Keaton says or slang.
Keaton says slang asterisk.
Gaga grumps says I don't have anything against the bee honestly Shireen. Gaga grumps says no G for slang.
Shireen Curly says try be ha ha ha.
TH7 says blank. Keaton says must be blank then.
TH7 says beforgfully.
Gaga grumps says or flank. Gaga grumps says is slank a thing?
PH7 says no.
Gaga grumps says okay then 2 options 2 guesses no filter needs.
PH7 says beforgfillo.
It's playtime!
Gaga Grump says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat.
Don't let her loose! Grumps is on the buttons! Don't let him push yours! Are you ready to play? Let those stickers fly! Which team are you on? Team Gaga, give a cheer. Team Grumps, are you here? Team Gaga, are you ready? Team Grumps, are you steady? Game! Gremlins, let's go! Game! Gremlins, let's go! Team Gaga, 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 Team Gaga, give a cheer. Team Grumps, are you here? Team Gaga, are you ready? Team Grumps, are you steady? Game! Gremlins, let's go!
Gaga Grump says Dooba Dooba Gaga. Share the LIDE, chat the chat and shout her with roses and GGs.
Grump says treasure box is open.
Gaga Grump says grabby day half while I set up the next ball. Gaga Grump says let's play Wordle. Gaga Grump says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now. Gaga Grump says we are starting with A. M again. Gaga Grump says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Like a thumb, race to the top, like a thorn. Tap and don't stop, like a thorn. Who will be crowned like a thorn? Gremlin renowned, like a thorn. Fingers on fire, like a thorn. Gremlins don't tire, like a thorn. Hearts beat flying, like a thorn.
Gaga Grump says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance.
Carrot Carrot has entered the grotto.
IDK says adieu.
Gaga Grump says starting with MIDK. Gaga Grump says your word starting with M please PH7. Gaga Grump says if your word is being filtered, try I'd like word.
PH7 says Atmer.
Gaga Grump says haha ma you got.
PH7 says double R.
It's Tyler has entered the grotto.
It's Tyler says oops lol.
Gaga Grumps says if I can blooming spell it.
TH7 says spray.
Gaga Grumps says R lives at number 3, Y needs a new home. Gaga Grumps says hey Tyler. Gaga Grumps says spray fits. Gaga Grumps says Y lives at number 5.
PH7 says Carly.
Gaga Grumps says Curly works.
PH7 says Burley.
Gaga Grumps says that is all I see too, yes.
Teresa Lankarikova has entered
Teresa
the grotto.
Lankarika 1 says Curly.
Gaga Grumps says hey Teresa, we had already tried Curly. Gaga Grumps says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat.
Good game.
A random star chosen by fate. Play your part, it's a live date.
Gaga Grumps says can you beat me at Wordle? Check out my daily posts and share your results with me.
Shireen Curly says sorry, my child ran off with me phone.
Gaga Grumps says grab your daily heart while I set up the next ball. Gaga Grumps says lol it happens Shireen.
A pretty sky. A Wordle with Gaga. A Wordle with Gaga. Da da da. A Wordle with Gaga. Ra
Gaga Grumps says let's play Wordle. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Teresa Lankarika 1 says quick.
Gaga grumps says and he's not even looking. Gaga grumps says we are starting with A. Q. Gaga grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Teresa Lankarika 1 says quick.
Like a thong, race to the top, like a thon. Tap and don't stop, like a thon. Who will be crowned like a thon? Gremlin renowned like
Gaga grumps says need to win the light race.
gremlins don't tire like a thon. Hearts
Alexander Bast has entered the grotto.
gremlins define.
Gaga grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance. Gaga grumps says your word starting with Q, please, Shireen.
Lexanderbis says queen.
Shireen Curly says quiet.
Gaga grumps says hey Lexand, how you doing? Gaga grumps says quiet you got. Gaga grumps says a yellow E in need of a home. Gaga grumps says no suggestions. Gaga grumps says I'm going shame. Gaga grumps says E lives at number 5 Wordle Street.
Summer has entered the grotto.
Summer says prone.
Shireen Curly says Lord.
Teresa Lankarikova 1 says clone.
Gaga grumps says ha Summer, I was already typing in.
Summer says at Gaga and Grumps.
Gaga Grumps says R and O live at 2 and 3.
Zami has entered the grotto.
Zombie says broke.
Zombie says drove.
Gaga Grumps says broke fits. Hi Zami.
Scott Moore has entered the grotto.
Scott Moore says drove.
Summer says grove or drove.
Shireen Curley says grow.
Zami says froze.
Terrazalan Carico 1 says froze.
Sophie has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says drove fits. Do we want a filter for F, G and D?
Zombie says fudge for filler.
Shireen Curley says yes, please, X.
Zombie says has F, G and D.
Gaga Grumps says fudge it is. Gaga Grumps says froze FTW. Gaga Grumps says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat.
Welcome in, guys. Settle down. Grab your heartbeat. Share us round.
Gaga Grumps says welcome Gremlins to the game grotto. Take a seat, grab your daily heart, claim your points and prepare to play.
Gang Gremlins on the scene. 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 Now tap that screen. Tap it, tap that screen. Yeah, tap it. Gang Gremlins coming, let's go. Now tap that screen. Tap it, tap that screen. Yeah, tap it. Let's see those team stickers flow. Gang Gremlins on the scene. Now tap that screen. Now tap that screen.
Gaga Grumps says treasure box up if you need a coin to your daily heart.
Gang Gremlins on the scene.
Gaga Grumps says let's play Wordle. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Zami says great.
Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. Z.
Zami says zebra.
Gaga Grumps says wheel coming in with all the obscure letters today. Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Like a thong, race to the top, like a thon. Tap and don't stop, like a thon. Who will be crowned like a thon? Gremlin renowned, like a thon. Fingers on fire, like a thon. Gremlins don't tire, like a thon. Hearts beat flying, like a thon. Gremlins
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance. Gaga Grumps says your word starting with Z, please, Zami.
Grumps says treasure box is open.
Gaga Grumps says is it still zebra?
Zami says zebra.
Gaga Grumps says zebra you got.
PH7 says Haven.
Gaga Grumps says yellow E and are in need of homes.
Zami says cheap.
Gaga Grumps says Haven fits. Gaga Grumps says we added a homeless H.
PH7 says shake.
Zami says cheap.
PH7 says there is a H.
Gaga Grumps says cheap still fits. Gaga Grumps says H lives at number 2. Gaga Grumps says Shake still fits. Gaga Grumps says A and E live at 3 and D5.
NEWTG says theme.
TH7 says elate.
PH7 says MBM. Gaga Grumps says I don't think tame is a word.
Nuke says thame do it.
PH7 says yes.
It's playtime!
Gaga Grumps says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat.
Grumps is on the buttons! Don't let him push yours! Are you ready to play? Let those stickers fly! Which team are you on? Team Gaga, give a cheer. Team Grumps, are you here? Team Gaga, are you ready? Team Grumps, are you steady? Game! Gremlins, let's go! Game! Gremlins, let's go!
Gaga Grumps says do the Gaga. Share the LIVE, chat the chat and shower her with roses and GGs.
Give a cheer. Team Grumps, are you here? Team Gaga, are you ready? Team Grumps, are you steady? Game! Gremlins, let's go! Game!
Gaga Grumps says grabby day hot while I set up the next ball.
Gremlins, let's go! Game! Gremlins, let's go! Game! Gremlins, let's go!
Gaga Grumps says let's play Wordle. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now. Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. K.
Grumps says oh, come on.
Gaga Grumps says the wheel is on fire lol. Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Grump says at James High.
Race to the top like a thorn.
James has entered the grotto.
Like a thorn. Who will be crowned like a thorn? Gremlin renowned like a thorn. Fingers on fire like a thorn. Gremlins don't tire like a thorn.
Gaga Grump says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance.
Gremlins define.
Gaga Grump says hi James, nice to see you.
Zombie says me.
Gaga Grump says your word starting with K, please, James.
James says karma.
Gaga Grump says karma you got.
It's a Wordle wipeout. No letters to shout.
Gaga Grump says wipeouts in the chat.
James says power.
Zombie says slow.
PH7 says well.
Grump says house.
PH7 says it whelp.
Zombie says cloud.
Gaga Grump says whelp fits.
Claire Alice says bench.
Gaga Grump says a yellow H in need of a home.
James says hound. Claire Alice says titch.
Gaga Grump says hound works. Gaga Grump says H lives at number 1 Wordle Street. Oh, moved in next door.
Isabel has entered the grotto.
Isabel says host.
Gaga Grump says nice entrance, Isabel. Gaga Grump says hoist fits. Gaga Grump says no change.
James says hobby.
Zombie says almost to 30K.
Gaga Grumps says awesome tapping work. Gaga Grumps says hobby works.
James says yes.
Gaga Grumps says hobby it is GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat.
Wordle with Gaga. Wordle with Gaga. Will the fireworks fly?
Gaga Grumps says third like goal smashed your fingers rock.
Chosen by fate. Play a part. It's a live date. Wordle with Gaga. Wordle with Gaga. Wordle with Gaga.
Gaga Grumps says can you beat me at Wordle? Check out my daily posts and share your results with me. Gaga Grumps says grab your daily heart while I set up the next board.
A pretty sky. Wordle with Gaga. Wordle with Gaga. Wordle with Gaga.
Gaga Grumps says let's play Wordle. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now. Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. M again.
Gurjaz has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Gurjaz says moist.
Eva has entered the grotto.
Tapping don't stop like a thon. Who will be crowned like a thon? Gremlin renowned like a thon. Fingers on fire.
Gaga Grumps says hey Gurjaz welcome.
Hearts beat flying like a thon. Gremlins defying.
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat now let's see your fingers dance. Gaga Grumps says your word starting with M please James.
James says mouse.
Gaga grumps says mouse you got. Gaga grumps says a yellow E in need of a home.
James says pleat.
Gaga grumps says pleat fits. Gaga grumps says E lives at number 3, L needs a home.
Claire Ellis says leech.
Gaga grumps says any suggestions. Gaga grumps says leech fits.
Claire Ellis says wheel.
James says cheer.
Gaga grumps says well that seems clear when you look at it like that.
James says never mind.
Gaga grumps says needs an L James. Gaga grumps says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat.
Welcome in, guys. Settle down. Grab your heartbeat. Share us round. Now tap that screen. Tap it, tap it. Tap that screen. Yeah, tap it, tap it.
Good
It's
game.
your warm-up routine. Gang Gremlins on the scene. Gang Gremlins on the scene.
Good game.
Gang Gremlins on the scene.
Good game.
Gang
Good game.
Gremlins on the scene.
Good game. Good game.
Now tap that
Good
screen.
game.
Tap it, tap it.
Gaga Grumps says we do the Gaga. Share the LIVE, chat the chat and shower her with roses and GGs.
Let's see those team stickers flow. Gang gremlins on the scene. Now tap that screen. Now tap that screen. Now tap that screen.
Gaga Grumps says treasure box up if you need a coin for your daily heart.
Gang gremlins on the scene.
Gaga Grumps says grab your daily heart while I set up the next board. Gaga Grumps says who's ready to play Wordle. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now. Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. C. Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Millar has entered the grotto.
Race to the top like a thon. Tap and don't stop like a thon. Who will be crowned like a thon? Gremlin renowned like a thon. Fingers on fire like a thon. Gremlins don't tire like a thon. Hearts beat flying like
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance. Gaga Grumps says hey Millar, nice to see you.
Millar says hi.
Gaga Grumps says your word starting with C, please Grumps.
Grumps says chaos.
Gaga Grumps says apt. Gaga Grumps says chaos you got. Gaga Grumps says you didn't have it at the end of the song either. Gaga Grumps says Alives at number 3H is homeless. Gaga Grumps says you aren't an inconvenience at all. Gaga Grumps says Heath to try out 2 spots for the H. Gaga Grumps says wow, that wasn't bad. Give Gaga her fireworks. Gaga Grumps says has to end in T either. Gaga Grumps says only one word it can be.
Fireworks for Gaga. It's a performance night.
Gaga Grumps says Wordle in 3. Let's see those fireworks. Gifts and emojis will explode on Gaga's face.
So gifts explode with glee. Fireworks for Gaga. Emojis make her happy.
Good game.
As in her face they slap
Good game.
me. Fireworks for Gaga.
Good game. Good game.
Fireworks
Good
for
game.
Gaga. From a single rose to a whole bouquet. Anything will be okay. If you can, that's okay. Smileys in chat still win the day. Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga.
Che has entered the grotto.
Che says just coming to let you know you're in A and E. All okay, but Maisie had a big bump to the head. Gaga Grumps says oh no, keep me informed.
Che says will do.
Gaga Grumps says grab you daily heart while I set up the next board. Gaga Grumps says let's play Wordle. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Grump says it wrong when Sedgwick High. Grump says treasure box is open.
Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. L. Gaga Grumps says yay Eve. Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Like a thon, race to the top. Like a thon, tap and don't stop. Like a thon, who will be crowned? Like a thon, gremlin renowned. Like a thon,
Gaga Grumps says get tapping either.
gremlins don't tire. Like a thon, hearts beat flying. Like a thon, gremlins defying.
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance. Gaga Grumps says your word starting with L please Eva. Gaga Grumps says lucky you got. Gaga Grumps says a yellow sea in need of a home.
Carly has entered the grotto.
Carly says craft.
Gaga Grumps says what an entrance Carly.
Carly says thanks.
Gaga Grumps says no change.
Holly Wheeler has entered the grotto.
Carly says space, I know there is no way but get it.
Carly says okay.
Gaga grumps says how about spice because there is an I.
Carly says okay, yes.
Gaga grumps says C lives at number 4. S and I are homeless.
NUFC Life has entered the grotto.
NUFC for life says disco.
Gaga grumps says NUFC in the house with disco.
Holly Wheeler says do disco.
It's playtime! Good game. Gaga is in the box!
Gaga grumps says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat.
Grumps is on the buttons! Don't let him push yours! Are you ready to play? Let those stickers fly! Which team are you on? Team Gaga, give a cheer. Team Grumps, are you here? Team Gaga, are you ready? Team Grumps, are you steady? Game! Gremlins, let's go! Game! Gremlins, let's go! Team Gaga, Team Gaga, give a cheer. Team Grumps, are you here? Team Gaga, are you ready?
Gaga grumps says can you beat me at Wordle? Check out my daily posts and share your results with me.
Gremlins, let's go! Game! Gremlins, let's go! Game! Gremlins, let's go!
Gaga grumps says grab me daily half while I set up the next ball.
Game! Gremlins, let's go!
Gaga grumps says let's play Wordle.
Fizzy Condicio has entered the grotto.
Gaga grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says hello.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says MB for missing yesterday.
Gaga grumps says hey there Fizzy, welcome back. Gaga grumps says we are starting with A. V. Gaga grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says hey.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says bae.
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance.
Grump says at Fizzy Candy who won welcome back.
Ryan Winter has entered the grotto.
Ryan Winter 60 says David.
Fizzy Condicio 1 says hello Grumps.
Oscar has entered
Fizzy
the grotto.
Condicio 1 says vague.
Oscar says value.
Gaga Grumps says your word starting with V please busbutter. Gaga Grumps says hey Oscar.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says vague maybe.
Gaga Grumps says visit you got.
Abyss has entered the
Oscar
grotto.
says stamp.
Gaga Grumps says yellow S&T in need of homes.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says stack.
Abyss says hey.
Ryan Winter 64 says start.
Gaga Grumps says stam fits. Gaga Grumps says hey Abyss how goes it?
Oscar says already very hard law.
Gaga Grumps says yep what goes before the T lol.
Oscar says OUR would be the only ones that would make sense.
Ryan Winter 64 says odors.
Gaga Grumps says but the S needs to go somewhere.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says I would have said tone, but there's no S in it.
Gaga Grumps says Otra's invalid.
Oscar says honors.
Ryan Winter 64 says Otis. Oscar says NBM Path 5.
Gaga Grumps says Otters is 6.
Oscar says Arcturs.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says ethos.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says ethos.
Gaga Grumps says Fizzy with the save.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says yes, see.
Fireworks for Gaga. It's a performance night. Explode 'em on her face. She's in a happy
Gaga
place.
Grumps says fireworks for Fizzy.
Wordle within 3, so gifts explode with glee. Fireworks for Gaga. Emojis make her happy. As in her face they slappy. Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga. From a single rose to a whole bouquet. Anything will be okay. If you can, that's okay. Smileys in chat still win the day. Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga.
Gaga Grumps says okay, let's play the last Wordle of the day. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Ryan Winter 64 says unity.
Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. L.
Ryan Winter 64 says limb.
Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says Ladle.
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance. Gaga Grumps says your word starting with L, please Fizzy.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says I would like the word ladle.
Gaga Grumps says ladle you got. Gaga Grumps says hey Vinter. Gaga Grumps says L lives at number 4. Gaga Grumps says no plurals. Gaga Grumps says how about mold? Gaga Grumps says there are no plurals in Wordle love Coco.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says coolly.
Gaga Grumps says a yellow U in need of a home. Gaga Grumps says curly. Gaga Grumps says along with Surly and Burly.
Fireworks for Gaga. It's a performance.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says GG Gaga.
On her face, she's in a happy place. Fireworks for Gaga.
Gaga Grumps says Wordle in 3. Let's see those fireworks. Gifts and emojis will explode on Gaga's face. Gaga Grumps says thanks for joining me to play Wordle. I will be back at 4 PM UK tomorrow for more Wordle with Gaga.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says okay.
Gaga Grumps says can you beat me at Wordle? Check out my daily posts and share your results with me.